We, the Special Mission Unit, were sent here to rescue hostages upon a request from the Lloyd government. There was, however, no sight of a camp at the designated location. We had been tricked by the Lloyd regime. What met our eyes instead was... How could Lloyd's government betray us?
When Last Alert arrived in America towards the end of 1990, it landed with a thud. Not only was it exclusive to the TurboGrafx 16, a console that was stuck in a distant third place behind the NES and Genesis, but it was exclusive to the TurboGrafx CD add-on, which further limited it to a niche audience. While another TurboGrafx CD exclusive, East Book 1 and 2, was at least the subject of fawning critics for its groundbreaking cinematic presentation, Last Alert received a middling verdict from the EGM review crew and was practically ignored by other major game magazines at the time. And yet, Last Alert took on a new life thanks to the internet, which discovered the game's horrendous English voice acting. You know, passages like this.
Fool! Almond's already been taken away!
Well, then all I need to do is let you tell me where he is.
And this.
Hey guy! Let my baby Betty throw you a kiss!
You're some weirdo naming your helicopter.
And even this.
You've shown me some fancy action here. The damages on this ship and the weapons aboard will come to $1 billion.
People will hate you, Steve, if you're too stingy.
The voice acting was bad enough that it's even mentioned by the original EGM reviewers, but it took on a new life in the 21st century as an internet meme, especially as clips proliferated throughout YouTube. Last Alert isn't the only early CD-ROM game to be notable for its atrocious acting, and some of the later TurboGrafx CD games like Dragon Slayer are arguably even worse. But Last Alert's pulpy pastiche of Rambo and low-budget anime OVA is uniquely enduring as far as bad game voice acting goes. Even just typing the words Last Alert into the YouTube search bar returns Last Alert voice acting as the top recommendation. Last Alert, the game, has become synonymous with video game with bad voice acting. But this is a bit unfair. Last Alert isn't a particularly great game or a must-play, but there's much more to it than just some meme-worthy voice acting. At its core, Last Alert is an overhead running gun in the vein of Commando or its TurboGrafx 16 contemporary, Bloody Wolf. But Last Alert, like many console-exclusive games working in a genre previously associated with arcades, expands on the basic gameplay concepts of a game like Commando by adding RPG elements in a larger narrative scope. Protagonist Guy Gazama is recruited by the CIA to take down the Force Project, a shadowy consortium trying to take over the world. Or something like that. Despite all of the cutscenes and voice acting, the plot is pretty vague. It's 80s action movie cliches all the way down, as Guy takes down a Muammar Gaddafi stand-in, a pretty racist Hong Kong mafia caricature, Chairman Steve, and ultimately some kind of evil scientist. The action takes place across 6 missions, each of which is composed of multiple stages. There are 23 stages in total, which is one of the ways in which Last Alert flexes its use of the then new CD-ROM technology. While the stages aren't particularly long, there's an incredible amount of variety for a game of this vintage. Tile sets are rarely reused, and small details such as Guy wearing heavier clothing in a snowy forest and a tuxedo on a luxury cruise ship are plentiful. In an era when cartridge and cue card games often relied on reusing sprites and tiles with only palette swaps to spice things up, it really stands out. Most stages are simple affairs in which the only goal is running to the end to confront a boss, but there are a few that try something more ambitious. A handful of stages are more open-ended, with goals such as setting bombs and rescuing hostages. A few stages even take some obvious inspiration from Metal Gear, and introduce some light stealth elements. If you stick to using just your pistol in these stages, you'll face light opposition from just a handful of enemies, but bring out the big guns and you'll be swarmed. Last Alert's RPG elements are very typical of the ways in which the popularity of RPGs in Japan influenced other genres, which is to say that they're light and don't offer too much in the way of meaningful choices. Throughout the game, killing enemies gives you experience points, which leads to leveling up. As you gain levels, you'll gain more health, as well as additional weapons. So while you can't just collect a power-up to get a spread shot, once you reach the level where you get the spread shot, you can use it as much as you want. There are a handful of other special weapons you can collect as power-ups, but these are rarely as useful as your raw firepower. By and large, the only thing you'll need to remember to do is check your weapons after leveling up to see if you have a new one available. The game is balanced, so you're practically guaranteed to reach max level by the end, so it doesn't require a lot of active attention. While it was released with little fanfare in America, Last Alert's initial release in Japan in December 1989, under its original title, Red Alert, seemed to be a relatively big deal. Published by the prolific Nihon Telenet, it was developed by Shin Nihon Lasersoft, a new subsidiary set up in collaboration between Nihon Telenet and Japanese electronics retailer Yodobashi Camera, with a focus on developing CD-ROM games. Lasersoft would eventually become best known for the Cosmic Fantasy series of JRPGs, as well as developing a few of the later games in the Valis series. Lasersoft was extremely early to the CD-ROM boom that would come to define 90s video games. When the PC Engine CD-ROM add-on was released in December 1988, it debuted with the first CD-ROM games for any platform. Early games were underwhelming, such as a weak port of the original Street Fighter and Noriko, a flimsy adventure game about meeting a pop idol. Releases trickled out through 1989, but many were simply arcade ports that used Redbook audio in lieu of PC Engine chip music. Hudson and Red's expansive JRPG Tengai Makyo Ziria showed off the potential of the medium, but little else did. Lasersoft released its first game in June 1989, a version of Valis 2 that followed the basic plot of the computer versions of the game, but stripped it down to a bare-bones action platformer with cinematic intermissions. Super Albatross, a perfunctory golf game with some cinematics thrown in, arrived a few months later in September. But Red Alert was clearly pushed as its big flagship game for that year, and given the holiday release slot on December 15th, around a week before the other big 1989 holiday release for the PC Engine CD-ROM, East Book 1 and 2. When placed in the context of its original release, it's clear to see that Red Alert was one of the first attempts at creating an ambitious game that took full advantage of the CD-ROM medium. Besides Tengai Makyo and Ys, there just weren't very many games being exclusively developed for CD-ROM that swung for the fences like this. There were less than 20 releases for the CD-ROM at the time of Red Alert's release, and that includes filler like 3 volumes of ROM Karaoke. Even when taking into account other platforms, the first computer CD-ROM game was a version of Science the Manhole for Macintosh, released in 1989. So while Lasersoft didn't always make the best games, it was at the vanguard of the gaming industry's push towards CD-ROM. Tracking down the important figures in Japanese game development from the 80s can be difficult, and there isn't too much information about the folks at Lasersoft who worked on Red Alert. Producer Fumiyuki Moriyama has credits on movie games for several other Lasersoft games, such as Valis 2 and Cosmic Fantasy, but nothing else. Digging around the Japanese retro gaming internet brings up credits for someone with the same name for 2 incredibly obscure games for the FM7 computer, but that's it. Director Masami Hinari has credits on movie games that go back to programming work on the early Telnet computer game American Truck, and end at general producer credits on later Telnet games like Cosmic Fantasy IV. According to the Japanese business website, Dunbury Accountant, Hinari is now CTO of ComC, a company that specializes in Pachi-slot mobile games. The real driving creative force behind Red Alert, though, seems to be Yukito Ohayashi, who is credited with game design and as the author of the visual scenes. While Ohayashi's Moby Games credits include several other Lasersoft games and quite a few Namco games through the PS1 and PS2 eras, he maintains a personal Twitter account that includes a more comprehensive list of credits in his bio. Ohayashi was a founding member of Atlus, where he worked on the original Megami Tensei and Bio Senshi Dan, a game best known to Westerners as the unreleased Bashi Bazook, Morphoid Masher. He then worked on the cult Famicom adventure game Idol Hakinden before moving on to Lasersoft. He seems to still be active in the gaming industry working for Taito. So while Red Alert may have been early in his career, he was already something of a vet with some impressive credits under his belt. Red Alert also had a much more prestigious voice cast than would be expected given the amateur voice actors in the American release. Guy Kazama is played by Akira Kamiya, a legendary voice actor who played Kenshiro in Fists of the North Star, among other roles. The rest of the cast isn't quite as notable, but they are all still professional voice actors from the anime world. Despite some famous talent and veteran game developers, Red Alert didn't seem to find much success in Japan. It received a 24 out of 40 from Famitsu, and a later ranking of PC Engine games in 1993 by PC Engine Fan magazine placed it at 219 out of 485 games. Not exactly dreadful, but squarely middle of the road. For all of the ways in which Last Alert points to a future of more cinematic and expansive video games, it has some serious flaws. Its main problem is that the moment-to-moment gameplay is just not that engaging. Guy moves at a leisurely clip, which makes it a slog to move through stages, especially later ones which are long and full of dead ends. Enemies mostly either stand in a stationary position or haphazardly run towards you. Bullets are slow and easy to dodge. You start with 7 points of health and just gain more over time, so there's rarely much in the way of tension. You just kind of plod through the game for the most part. The upside to this is that the game is largely a cakewalk. The difficulty does ramp up a little bit towards the end, but you can mostly turn your brain off and just enjoy the ride. Your most frustrating opponent will probably be the timer. It's not an issue on most stages, but it can be annoying in an early stage where you need to rescue hostages, and a few later stages where there's very little room for error. The game does control quite well for 1989 though. Holding down the fire button even allows you to strafe, which is usually the best strategy to plow through enemies efficiently. So while Last Alert is far from a classic, there's a little bit more to it than just the classic voice acting memes. It's an early attempt at merging arcade gameplay with the expansive possibilities of the CD-ROM medium. Even aside from the voice acting, it's a very campy game, which pairs well with the brain-dead gameplay. If you're interested in seeing what the dawn of CD-ROM games was like, it's not a bad way to spend an afternoon.
Anything you said, but it seems for once you were right.
Don't worry about that. Where are you?
I wonder. The signal's already been sent. I'm tired of sunbathing. Come and pick me up right away.